Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in this particular video, I'm going to discuss about Minimum Wages Act, right? So it is one of those labor acts which is very important. So anybody who's preparing for any kind of exams, or even you are studying in an MBA program or in a BBA program, there are high chances that you are studying these labor acts. And I'm going to discuss one of all of them one by one. So let's begin. If you want to join my Telegram channel, here is the link. You can join it, and if you want to access my notes, you can just click on join the channel and you can access it. Okay, let's begin. So the first thing very important is, let's have a brief introduction about it, right? The Minimum Wages Act 1948 was enacted to secure the minimum wages of the workers in the certain specified employments. So basically the goal of setting up this act was to ensure that anybody who is working in a particular employment or a particular job, he must secure a minimum wage as a worker, right? They can meet their, and it was set up in such a way that they can meet their basic needs and live a decent life. So basically this act secures a minimum wage for the worker so that like uh, they can meet their basic needs. Very simple. It applies to all the industries. So every industry within the premises of the government, it employs to all. It employs across all India. All the industries within India, they have to follow this act with the provisions of periodic revisions. But there are certain if and but in every industry. But more and over, this act remains same for all the industry working in India. Okay, let's begin. The next thing important here is, what is the objective, right? The first objective was to prevent the exploitation of the labor. So we all know that labor do get a lot of exploitation while working in industries. So this act was made so that at least they should earn a basic amount of money if they're working somewhere, to ensure the worker receive the wage that meets the basic cost of living. So since everybody needs that basic cost of living, at least wage that meet their basic cost of living. So for that purpose, this was made. And third was to provide the uniformity in wages across different regions and employment sectors. So it was also created from the perspective that there must be uniformity, right? Since every industry comes in the preview of this particular act, that means there must be uniformity across different region, different industry, different sectors, so that everybody should follow it. Okay, these are the key main three objectives. Now let's move on to next thing, and that is that how many parts are there. So there are basically 5 parts, and there are 30 section in this act, and I'll try to give you an overview of each and every part and each and every section. Okay, so that you get an idea that, okay, what is section 1, what is section 2, section 3 till section 30. I'll try to give you a complete overview in this video. Okay, so part one, which was like a very basic introduction. So part one basically includes short title, extent, and the commencement of section one. So basically it gives you that what is this act called, right? The title of the act is there in the section one. Then the extent, the scope is written in section one of this particular act. The third is commencement, on which date it was commenced. So it was basically commenced on 15th March 1948, but there has been a lot of provisions made after, and the recent one was made in 2019, and even a labor code came in 2022, right? So it is very important that time to time there has been a lot of updation in this act as well. What is the applicability? So applicability is to which industries it is applicable, to which occupation it is applicable, either we are applicable to organized or unorganized. Everything is given in the part one. So it's talk about the name, it talks about the objective, it talks about the extent, the applicability, what we call as the scope, and the date of commencement. All these things are in part of section one. Moving on to section 2. So what does section 2 has? So it has all the terms. So for example, there is a term called appropriate government. So appropriate government means it could be central government also, it could be state government also. So whenever we are talking about railways, mines, oil field, it is all about central government. And whenever we are talking about the other employments, we are talking about the state governments. Okay. And the second term which is used here is employer, the person who is basically giving you the work, right? Those who employ workers. So they are called employers. The third term which is used here is scheduled employment. What is scheduled employment? Any employment specified in the schedule under the act for which minimum wages must be fixed. So any employment which is part of the preview of the act and that is specified in the act, that comes under scheduled employment. Next is the wages. So wages is any kind of remuneration. It could be in the form of house rent, it could be in the form of overtime wages, it could be in the form of bonus or any kind of special allowance. Everything is mentioned in section 2. What kind of different wages? Then the employee is the person who is working somewhere. He can be skilled, he can be unskilled, he could be manual, he can be clerical, working. There could be different types of employees, but at the end, employee is an employee who is working, right? And then cost of living index number. So this is again an important term, the index number, which basically government publishes to ensure that what should be the minimum wage based on the inflation or cost of living. Okay, so all the terms, these terms are mentioned in section 2. Now moving on to next, that is section 3, and that is about fixing of the minimum rates or wages. This section empowers the appropriate government, either central or state, to fix the minimum wage for the worker employed in the scheduled employment. So basically, in section 3, the power lies in the hand of the government. It could be central government or the state government, but their role is to fix the minimum wage, which must be applied to every region, every sector, every industry, every employer, right? Which is part of the scheduled employment. I've already explained you the scheduled employment. The next is the fixing of minimum wages. So employment specified in the schedule. So it is very important that whenever you are fixing the minimum wage, you must look at the nature of the employment as per the scheduled employment, and the employment later added by the notification of, and later on so when it started with a limited number of scheduled employment, but with time and again with an official gadget we keep on adding up new employment if there is coming up anyone, right? What are the different types of minimum wages we can get? First is time rate, the wages which we get per hour, per day, per month. Then the piece rate, the wages which we get based on the unit we produce. Then the guaranteed time rate, that means the wages ensured for the particular working time, right? So if we are working for a 1 week, we will get a guaranteed payment. For working for a 1 month, we'll get a guaranteed payment. And then overtime rate. So anything which is overtime, which is within after my working hours, if I'm doing any kind of work, that will come under overtime rate. So these are the different types of rates which are mentioned in section 3 of this particular act. Moving on, in section 3 also there are certain more things, that is classification of workers. The worker can be classified as skilled, unskilled, semi-skilled, high skilled. Okay, it is based on locality and reasons also, and in the nature of employment, regular, temporary, casual. So all these things, I mean the type of worker or the type of wages, they all are mentioned in section 3. Then we have the review of wages. So the government keep on must be revising their, so time and again every 5 years basically they revise their minimum wages, right? It also revised the wages earlier it needed due to the economic changes. So if there is any change in the economy, or if there is an inflation coming up or inflation is picking up, then in that case automatically the government tries to revise the wages, right? So everything is in the preview of section 3. Moving on to section 4. Section 4 is about minimum rate of wages. So in the section 4, it talks about what does this minimum wages include? This include different components, component like a basic rate or the cost of living allowance. So basically that is the basic rate of wages. And then there is a basic rate with variable tier also. So basically we get housing allowance, basically cost of living, that is housing allowance, and then we get a DA, right, dearing allowance, right? And then we talk, which is based on the economic changes. If any economic changes happening, that is based on DA, and then all inclusive, which include both basic as well allowances. Which so basically generally a basic pay plus HRA plus DA is what is the total component, right? So and all inclusive. It is called all inclusive. And then it can be also fixed based on different bases, like it can be based on time based, it can be based on piece based. I already explained you that some people might get wages based on daily, some people might get on a weekly basis, somebody can get on monthly basis. Piece rate are also based on the output, how many units are being produced, based on that you get wages, right? Or how many sales you are doing, based on that you get a salary, right? So different companies, different industries follow different norms, but basically either it is time based or either it is piece based. Okay. Now moving on to section 5. So section 5 is all about procedure for fixing and revising minimum wages. So in this particular section 5, so there are two methods. What are the two methods? The one is called committee method. So what is committee method? Committee method means appointing a committee of employers as well as employees and the independent expert. So basically what government do, they try to appoint a committee where there is employers, there is employees, there are independent expert. They sit together, then they come submit their report, they submit their recommendation, and then based on their recommendation, the final wages are done. So that is called committee method. Okay. And the next method is called as the notification method. So notification method means if the government publish the draft notification through official gazette, right? And the period is of 2 months for any kind of objection or suggestion, right? After considering feedback, the government finalizes. So either government can form a committee or government can give directly official gazette and 2 months of time so that anybody wants to review or anybody wants to have any objection, they can raise their voice. Otherwise, it will be finalized after 2 months. Right? So these are the two methods which they use as a procedure for fixing the minimum wage, and that is mentioned in section 5. Moving to section 5, section 6. Section 6 is all about advisory committee and subcommittee. So advisory committee means they may appoint advisories. So basically they are the one who recommend the fair wages. What should be the fair wages, right? So these committees include the representative of the employers, employees, and independent members. So as I told you, right, there is a committee which is formed in section fee. But how these committees are formed? So these committees are formed because they are having members of representation of employers, then having members of employees, or they have independent members also. So that is in this way they form an advisory committee, right? The committee advise have no power to fix the wages. So basically they are the advisory committee. So they don't have the power to fix the wage, but they based on their committee they will give the recommendation. So their job, and the government will take decision, and that is part of section C. Now section 7 is advisory board. What is advisory board? The appropriate government, either central statement, shall constitute an advisory board. So what does this advisory board? They coordinate the work of wage fixing. So basically all the subcommittees which are working in different industries, they keep on working together and finalize their recommendation, and then there is an advisory board. An advisory board job is to ensure that all the committees are working in the right direction, they are coordinating with each other, and then they finally give their recommendation to the government, taking recommendation from all the subcommittees. How the composition? So basically I've already explained you that there are representatives of employers, employees, and there are certain independent members who including the chairperson. Okay. Section 7, advisory board. Then comes section 8. So section 8 is about central advisory board. So after subcommittees, advisory board, then comes the central advisory board. Central advisory is basically their job is to advise the fixation policy at the national level, right? So there are certain state advisory boards also, and they basically coordinate with central advisory board. So there are subcommittees, and then there are uh, committees, and then they are advisory board, and then there is a central advisory board. So it is a very four-tier system where they try to finalize from grassroots level to the top what should be the wage, like how the wage fixation should be done. Composition again, employer, employee, independent, expert, chairperson is also appointed by the central government. So more and over committee, either we talk about committee or central advisory board or advisory board, everywhere you will find certain people from employer, certain people from employee, certain people from independent board. Okay. Moving on to section number 9. So how the composition of committees and advisory board are done. So basically the government must ensure that there should be equal representation. This is very important, that employer and employee, they do have equal representation. Okay. This is very, very important. And then there are independent members that help in maintain neutrality and fairness. So there must be some independent members, right? So that there should not be any partiality, right? So there must be fairness. There must be a neutral ground, right? And then there is a one independent member who is appointed by the chairperson, right? And then section 10 and section 11. So section 10 is wages, different kind of wages. So what are the different rules we have? So general rule is that all the wages should be in money. They should be paid in cash. It's very important. So all the wages mentioned in this act is based on the money, cash. There are certain exceptions where the wages may be paid in kind of food, accommodation, or other benefits. So there must be some fringe benefits, what we call. There are certain jobs in which there will be these benefits also, but more and over every job will have some component of cash. And then conditions. It's very important that the wages should be fair, right? It should be reasonable. So every job has different conditions. So based on that working condition, government ensure that every worker should get fair and reasonable amount of money based on the conditions in which they are working, approved by the government. Okay. So section 10 is all about wages in kind. And what about section 11? So section 11 is about payment of wages in cash. So what are the different components here? So here wages must be paid in cash unless the governments allow otherwise. So basically, uh, the the default is cash, right? But in certain cases, as I told you, the government might permit you to give other benefits as salary or as wages, right? Payment can be made via bank transfer or by digital payment. So now a law has clearly mentioned that earlier they used to get money in hand, but now the government has clearly mentioned that all the salaries should be paid via digital payment, via bank transfer. That is how everybody is getting paid. Moving on to section 12. So section 12 is about minimum rate of wages to be paid. So what are the minimum rate of wages? How it is decided? No employer shall pay less than the minimum wage. Very important point. No employer in any industry, in any region, they are not allowed to pay less than what minimum wage has been fixed by the government as per this act. Right? If you are paying less, that means you are violating this act. Even a worker agrees to work on a lower wages, the employer cannot pay less. Yes, this is very important. There are certain cases, right? Employee might come and say, "Hey, I am ready to work at a lesser price," but employer cannot do it. Officially, they cannot. Legally, they cannot. Right? Next important, legal protection. Any agreement to accept lower wages is invalid and unenforceable. So if you signing in any agreement where you are accepting a lower wages, then later on you will not be able to claim it. It is unenforceable. It is invalid, right? This is what we have in section 12. Let's come down to section 13. Section 13 is about fixing of working hours, overtime and rest days. This is also mentioned this act. So the government has set the working hours for different employments. So different types of employment have different working hours, right? And it can be daily basis, it can be weekly basis, it can be over, like, so if somebody is working overtime, then you have to pay him extra wages for the extra hours, right? Then there must be rest days, there must be some intervals in the rest or rest in between the work. There must be rules for night shift. So there are some people who works in night shift, so all the rules related to night shift is mentioned here. And there are some special categories as well. So all these different types of workers who are getting paid on different basis of the nature of their job is all mentioned in this. But here very important point is rest day and interval, right? Sometimes you get a question that in which section of this act is rest day is permissible or intervals are permissible. So it's section 13. Okay. Moving on, no employer can force worker to work beyond the prescribed hours. Very important. Without paying overtime. If you are not paying them, you cannot enforce them to work overtime. Right? So it's very important that people with willingness, they want to stay, they can stay. But ideally, employer cannot force you to stay after working hours. Moving on to section 14, 15, 16, right? It is all about enforcement now, right? So section 14 is overtime wages. So if any worker is working beyond the prescribed working hours, they must be paid, and that is called overtime wages, which is generally higher than the normal wages. At times, it is paid twice than the regular rate. So if somebody is getting X amount for the daily job, you might get for overtime, you must get 2X in certain cases, but you must be paid higher than what your normal wages. That is your overtime wages, part of section 14. Moving on to section 15. Section 15 is wages for the worker who works less than the normal hours, right? So if the worker cannot complete the full working hour due to the employer's fault, and they must be still paid full wages. Now this is important. So if you are not able to complete your work because of the employer's fault, let's say machine was not working or anything happened in the plant, and that's why, then in that case also you are eligible to get paid full because it was not your fault, right? However, if the worker is absent without valid reason, the employer is not obliged to pay. In certain cases, if the employer has not taken the permission and he got absent, he didn't came up, then without any valid reason, then employer has the right that he might not be paying you. But if you are there and if anything happened in the plant or anywhere, because of the employer, you are eligible to get paid. Okay. Section 16, wages for two or more classes of work. So if the worker performs multiple types of work, different prescribed wages, then you must calculate it separately. So let's say in a same job, a worker is doing X thing and a Y thing. Then for X thing, his salary will be, his wages will be calculated separately, and for Y thing also, there it will be calculated separately, and then it will be added, and then will be the finally salary will be calculated. So that is part of section 16. Okay. Moving on to section 17, 18, 19. So what is section 17? Section 17 says minimum time rate wages for piece work. So for the workers who are paid based on piece rate. So piece rate means the people who are the people who are paid based on the per unit system, right? So if their earning must not fall below the minimum of the wage. This is also very important. Like for example, let's say if anybody is producing 100 units, right? And let's say he only get 10,000 rupees, okay? But he should get 12,000 based on the minimum wages. Then you have to consider 12,000, not the 10,000. So ideally you should get him produced 120 units so that he should get the minimum wages, right? Section 17. Section 18, maintenance of the register and record. It's very important to maintain proper record. Every record should be there. How many hours, which type of job, what is the working condition, overtime, wage reduction, everything should be recorded either digitally or with the copy or anything. But most of the time now we have digital systems, so we have to record everything, right? Moving on to section 19, which is called appointment of inspectors. So government also appoints inspector whose duty is to monitor compliance. So basically inspector are the one who goes to the workplaces, they check every record, they question employer as well as employees and ensure that minimum wages act must be paid correctly. So their role is more like a monitor role. Okay, they more act as a watchdog, right? Okay, moving on to section 20, 21, 22. 20 is all about claims and recovery of wages. So what happens that if the employee is paid less than the minimum wage, then in any situation, inspector came to know about it, right? They can file a claim. Very simple. So if you're not paying them as per the law, they can easily go to the authorities, they can claim, they can clearly file a case also in certain cases to ensure that you must pay according to the law, according to this act, and whatever the wages and compensation would be, then in that case, you must have to pay later on if the case doesn't go in your favor. Section 21, it talks about single application in respect of group of employees. So let's say there are a group of employees who collectively work for a company and they are paid underpaid. So in that case, you don't need to file, like every employee doesn't need to go to file a complaint, right? So you must file a single application, right? For recovering all for, and you can write the name of all the employees working there, but only single application will work. Okay. Section 21. Section 22 is all about penalty for paying less. So in case that you are not paying them the minimum wages, then you are supposed to face imprisonment of 6 months. So there is a possibility that you are you are in imprisonment, or you might also get a fine of 500 rupees, right? And keep on varying time to time, and it also vary from industry to industry. But as per 22, every penalty is written in section 22. Okay. Section 23, 24, 25. Let's talk about that. Section 23, it says penalty for other offenses. So there is a possibility that, let's say, you are not listening to the inspector, or inspector found something and you are not performing your duties, then in that case also you might get penalized for misinformation, right? Either it can be a fine in terms of money, could be 500 rupees, or it could be uh, so all those things in related to penalty, which is related to other offenses like misinformation or false information, falls in section 23. Section 24, exemption of employer from liability in certain cases. So there could be certain cases where there is an exemption which is given uh, in such a case. For example, if there is a natural disaster, right, or there is a financial crisis, so in that case you are exempted from all those penalties, right, because it's a situation which employer also cannot control, right? So in that case there will be no legal case or no criminal case or anything, nothing will happen, and you are exempted. Section 25 is contracting out the act is prohibited. So any agreement where the worker agrees to work for less than minimum wages is invalid. I've already explained you this earlier also, that even in if the worker agrees to work on a minimum wage which is less than what this act says, then in that case it will not be count as valid. Employer cannot exploit worker. Very important line. Employer cannot exploit worker by creating unfair acts, contracts, right? It's very important. Section 25. Moving on to section 26. Section 26 gives the power of the government to exempt certain employments. So there could be certain kind of employment which can be exempted in this act also. It's very important. Government has that authority. So section 26 mentions all those things. Section 27 is about power to add a schedule. So the government has all the powers. They can add any new type of employment. They can add any kind of scheduled employment. They can add, like, they can change the wages based on, and this section 27 gives them that power, right? Either they can form a committee or either they can do through a gadget, right? Section 28 is about power to make rules. The government can also have the power to frame rules regarding implementation of act or including phase fixation. So government can make changes or make changes in the advisory board or make changes in the committees based on this act. Section 28 give them that power. Section 29 says rules to be laid before the legislature. So it is very important that any rules made under this act must be presented before the legislature, right? So if you are looking for any kind of, so if any rules are being changed, it must be presented in front of the legislature for the final approval, right? It's very important. And section 29 about talks about that. And final section, which is called section 30, that is called reappeal and savings. So basically this section deals with the reappeal of previous law. So it is very important that this law is aligned with other laws also, right? So it must be aligned. Wage fixation ensure that any ongoing case or rights established under the earlier laws remain valid. So anything which is already there, that remains valid in this law as well. Even if it is mentioned, not mentioned here, still it will be valid. Okay. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this particular lecture. This is my new channel. Do subscribe to this channel. You will get a lot of content on this channel as well. I will also post my older channel, which is more into Hindi or mixed language. So you can follow me over there also. For all my English content, you can keep on following me here. Okay. So thanks for watching. We'll be meeting in the next session very soon. Bye bye.